My name is Richard Calloway. I am a 70-something-year-old man, and for most of my life, I believed I was one of the luckiest men in Kentucky. Not because I was rich or powerful, and not because life was easy, but because I had Margaret. For as long as I can remember, she was the center of everything good in my life. Every morning before sunrise, we would sit together on the back porch of our farmhouse with hot coffee in our hands, watching the farm slowly wake up. The sound of birds in the trees, the smell of fresh grass, and the cold morning air became part of our marriage, just like love itself, quiet, steady, and certain. When we first got married, we had almost nothing. I bought a few acres of worn-out land with borrowed money and an old tractor that broke down more than it worked. Most people believed we would fail within a few years, but Margaret never doubted me. While I worked from sunrise to sunset in the fields, she managed everything else. She kept our books, paid our bills, and still found the strength to make our small house feel warm, safe, and full of life. We went through everything together. Droughts that burned the soil dry, floods that destroyed crops, bad harvests, and years when prices were so low I did not know how we would survive winter. But every time life pushed us down, Margaret stood beside me and said the same thing. One problem at a time, Richard. We will get through it. And somehow, we always did. Slowly, the farm began to grow. 30 acres became 100, then 200, and eventually more than 400 acres across Harlan County. We planted corn, soybeans, and tobacco. Over time, the farm became successful, but what we built was never just about crops or money. It was about Margaret's vision. She believed the farm could be more than land. She turned part of it into a place where people could come together. She created a strawberry patch that brought families from miles away every summer. In the fall, she started hay rides. Every October, she decorated the barns with lights and made the place feel like a festival. Later, she built a wedding venue next to the flower garden she planted with her own hands. By the time we reached our 60s, weddings at Calloway Farms were booked more than a year in advance. Margaret understood people in a way I never could. I understood soil, weather, and crops. She understood hearts. Together, we built something stronger than money. We built a life. And at the center of that life was our daughter, Claire. From the moment she was born, Margaret loved her with all her heart, and so did I. Every decision we made, every acre we bought, every dollar we saved was for her future. We wanted her life to be easier than ours. Claire was born in the spring of 1974, right after one of the worst droughts our county had ever seen. Margaret used to joke that Claire came into the world already knowing how to survive hard times. As she grew, Claire was smart, confident, and strong-willed. She did well in school and always carried herself with a kind of confidence that reminded me of Margaret. We believed she could become anything she wanted. When she told us she wanted to study law, we supported her fully. We paid for her university at Kentucky and later Vanderbilt Law School. We never asked her to take loans. I even sold 40 acres of land I had worked years to buy so she could study without financial pressure. I still remember her graduation day. I wore my best suit, the one that always felt too expensive for a farmer like me. When they called her name, I cried harder than I had since my father died. I was proud of her in a way I cannot fully explain in words. For a while, everything felt complete. Claire came home during holidays. Margaret cooked her favorite meals. The house felt full again whenever she was there. Then Claire introduced us to a man named Derek Sims. He came from Louisville. From the first moment he walked into our farmhouse for Thanksgiving dinner, I could tell he was different from the people we knew in Harlan County. He was well-dressed, confident, and spoke like someone used to being listened to. He talked about investments, business growth, and financial planning like it was all simple and certain. At first, I tried to like him because Claire clearly loved him. He was polite enough, and he knew how to charm people. But Margaret saw something I ignored. One night after dinner, while we were cleaning dishes, she quietly told me she did not trust him. "That man looks at this farm like he already owns it," she said. I laughed and told her she was being too harsh. I said city people just behave differently. Margaret did not argue. She just stayed quiet, which meant she was thinking deeply. Claire and Derek got married the next year. The wedding was held on our farm, under the lights Margaret had hung around the barn. Everyone smiled in the photos. Everyone looked happy. But looking back now, I think that was the last time everything truly felt whole. Small changes began to appear in Margaret first. She misplaced her reading glasses more often. She forgot small things, like names from church. Once she repeated a story at dinner and laughed it off herself. We told ourselves it was just aging. She was still managing the wedding venue, still working, still writing letters, still herself most of the time. So we ignored the warning signs. Then one morning in September, everything changed. Margaret was helping prepare the barn for a wedding when she suddenly collapsed. A worker called me from the fields, and I rushed over as fast as I could. When I saw her, she looked pale and confused. She insisted she was fine, but fear was in her eyes. We drove straight to a hospital in Lexington. After several days of tests, a neurologist finally gave us the diagnosis: early-stage Alzheimer's disease, with vascular complications affecting memory and judgment. I remember sitting in that cold hospital office, feeling like the world was shrinking around me. Margaret just held my hand. "We survived droughts and floods," she said softly. "We will survive this too." and she meant it. The next day, I contacted our lawyer, Bill Tanner. He had handled our legal matters for over 20 years. We reviewed everything carefully: power of attorney, healthcare papers, trust documents, property ownership. Margaret signed everything while she was still fully able to understand and decide. She chose me as her healthcare decision maker because she trusted me completely. One part of the paperwork was very clear. Margaret did not want to be placed in a care facility unless she personally agreed later. That was her wish. After that, I called Claire and told her about the diagnosis. There was silence on the phone. At first, she sounded caring, but then her tone changed slightly. She said maybe she and Derek should become more involved in the farm and its management. I told myself she was just trying to help. I wanted to believe that. But things slowly changed. Claire and Derek started visiting more often. At first, it felt like support. Claire helped with paperwork, while Derek started asking questions about money, land value, profits, taxes, and long-term planning. He spoke less about Margaret's health and more about business structure and assets. Margaret noticed it too. She asked me quietly at night if I really trusted their intentions. I kept defending them because I did not want to believe anything bad about my own daughter. Later, our lawyer asked me a question that made me uneasy. He asked if Claire had mentioned guardianship or control over medical decisions. Then he told me a law firm from Louisville had been asking questions about challenging power of attorney cases involving Alzheimer's patients. I felt a cold shock in my chest. It became clear that someone was trying to find a way to question my legal authority over Margaret's care. From that moment, I could not ignore the feeling that something was changing in my family. Derek became more direct in conversations about the future. He spoke about care facilities and safer arrangements. Claire began to agree more and speak less. Then, about 8 months after the diagnosis, Margaret had an accident in the kitchen and hit her head. She had to stay in the hospital overnight for observation. I stayed with her as long as I could. Before I left, she asked me to bring her crossword book and tea the next morning. I promised her I would. The next morning, I arrived early at the hospital carrying both items. But before I could reach her room, a nurse stopped me. She checked the computer, then looked at me carefully and said, "I'm sorry, sir, you are not on the authorized visitor list for this patient." And in that moment, everything in my world seemed to stop. No future lawsuit, guardianship claim, or inheritance dispute could ever overturn it without the approval of a fully independent board. I still remember sitting across from my wife at Bill Tanner's desk, feeling both broken and strangely amazed. Even while dealing with Alzheimer's disease, Margaret had spent years protecting not only herself, but also me, our farm, and the values we had built our entire life around. She reached across the desk, held my hand softly, and asked me a very simple question. "Do you trust me, Richard?" I answered her honestly. "I have trusted you every single day since I was 26 years old." Margaret gave a small, gentle smile and nodded toward the papers sitting in front of us. "Then let's complete this before it becomes too late." A few weeks later, the competency hearing finally took place. Claire and Derek arrived with lawyers and strong legal arguments, fully ready to challenge my control over Margaret's medical decisions and care. But this time, reality stood stronger than their strategy. Dr. Patricia Owens clearly stated in court that Margaret still understood her choices and was able to express her wishes. Bill Tanner submitted every signed document without missing a single detail. After less than an hour of review, the judge rejected Claire's petition and confirmed that Margaret's healthcare directives would remain fully valid and active. Legally, we had won. Emotionally, however, the damage was already deep. That evening, after I returned home, I sat alone at the kitchen table and called Helen Park in Lexington. I told her it was finally time to activate the plan Margaret had prepared many years earlier. Helen only asked me one question: "Are you sure about this?" I looked out through the window at the dark fields that Margaret and I had built together, and I said, "Yes, I am." The process moved faster than I expected. Within just a few days, the trust was officially changed into the Margaret and Richard Callaway Agricultural Heritage Foundation. The wedding venue, the agritourism business, all equipment, and almost $900,000 in savings were permanently moved into a non-profit structure. Those assets no longer belong to me or Margaret or any future heir. They now belong to a mission instead, protecting family farms across eastern Kentucky. The transfer was fully legal, immediate, and could not be reversed. No inheritance claim could reach it. No lawsuit could undo it. No family member could take it for personal benefit. Everything Claire and Derek thought they were going to inherit simply disappeared overnight. 3 days later, Claire called me. Her voice was tight, controlled, but I could hear the shock underneath it. She said their lawyers had found out about the transfer and demanded an explanation. I gave her one without hesitation. I told her that the inheritance she believed was guaranteed was never truly hers by right. It had always been a gift from parents who loved her. And that gift ended the moment she used legal steps to keep me away from my wife's hospital room. There was a long silence. Then she quietly said I was being cruel. I replied with the truth. "No, Claire. Your mother saw this coming long before I did. This was also her decision." After that, the line went dead silent. For the first time, they realized they had lost everything they thought they were controlling. Claire and Derek continued fighting the case for several more months. They refused to accept the court's decision or the loss of the foundation assets. They spent large amounts of money on attorneys, trying to find any possible legal way to break Margaret's trust structure. But every attempt failed one after another. The foundation had been created carefully and legally, long before Margaret's health became a question. In the end, the courts completely dismissed all their challenges. During those months, Margaret's condition slowly became worse, although not as fast as we had feared. On better days, she still walked through the strawberry fields and continued reading letters sent by families helped by the new foundation. The first grant had gone to a young farming couple who were close to losing their cattle business after equipment breakdowns nearly destroyed them financially. Margaret read their thank you letter 3 times and smiled quietly afterward. "That is what this was always meant for," she said softly. Then, almost 8 months after our last painful conversation, Claire called again. This time, Derek was not with her. Her voice sounded tired, lower, and far less sharp than before. She told me they had separated, and Derek had moved into an apartment in Louisville. Without the expected inheritance they had once depended on, their marriage slowly broke down under stress and resentment. For the first time in a long time, Claire did not ask about money, legal papers, or the farm. She only asked about her mother. I told her Margaret had been having harder weeks lately, but she still asked about her daughter often. After a long silence, I told Claire she could come visit, but only if she came alone. When Saturday arrived, I stood at the kitchen window and watched as my daughter slowly walked across the yard toward the flower garden where Margaret was sitting in the warm afternoon sun. The moment Margaret saw her, she opened her arms without any hesitation, the same way she used to when Claire was just a little girl. Some kinds of love survive even the deepest betrayals. Margaret passed away on a cold Tuesday morning in February. She died at home, in the same bedroom where we had shared nearly 40 years of our lives, with the farm she loved visible through the window beside her bed. I was holding one of her hands, and Claire was sitting quietly on the other side holding her other hand. In her final weeks, Alzheimer's sometimes took parts of her memory, but it never removed the kindness at the center of who she was. Not long before she passed, Margaret opened her eyes clearly and looked at both of us. Her last words were simple: "Take care of this place. Take care of each other. That is all I ever wanted." Then she left peacefully, without fear or struggle. After 41 years together, the silence she left behind felt almost unbearable. In the months after her death, I often sat alone on the back porch with 2 cups of coffee out of habit, one for me and one for Margaret. Sometimes I would still turn to speak to her before realizing she was no longer there. But everywhere I looked on the farm, I still felt her presence. In the flower garden near the wedding venue, in the strawberry fields, and in the laughter of families who still came every season. Margaret had left parts of herself in every corner of this land. The foundation she created continued to grow far beyond anything either of us had imagined. Over the years that followed, the Margaret and Richard Callaway Agricultural Heritage Foundation provided millions in grants and support to struggling farming families across eastern Kentucky. Farms that would have disappeared forever were able to survive because of her vision. The wedding venue continued hosting celebrations every spring and summer, and the flower garden near the entrance kept blooming from May to October exactly as Margaret had planned. Claire slowly became part of the farm life again as well. She began visiting more often, sometimes helping with bookings and paperwork on weekends. We did not spend much time reopening old wounds or talking about the painful years in between. Some pain heals better through quiet presence rather than constant apologies. What mattered most was that she finally understood what her mother had always tried to teach us. The most valuable thing we ever built was never the land, the money, or the business itself. It was the love, sacrifice, and care that held it all together. Money can divide families when people treat it like ownership, but love, when protected in the right way, can survive betrayal, lawsuits, and even death itself. And every morning when the farm wakes up under the Kentucky sunrise, I still feel Margaret's presence reminding me of that truth.